I wanted to talk today about why you might not be seeing bucks, and there's a big reason for it. And this is an underlying reason we see in a lot of locations. Interesting, Dylan and I were just talking about summer planted beans. We tried beans last year in Wisconsin and we fenced them. And we had electric fence around it. We put in a lot of effort. It was about 1.25 acres. We planted them late. We put tillage radish into them and we took the fence down the end of October and they hammered them. But I didn't want them hitting it during the summer, and there's a big reason. Think about why bucks disperse in the first place. A yearling buck, 1.5-year-old buck, first set of antlers, a yearling. They disperse an average of about 1.5 miles. They do that because of female social pressure. The mothers kick them out of the herd. So I want you to relate that to your own property. When that buck is kicked out of the herd, the average dispersal distance is about 1.5 miles. Now, if you have big wilderness, big woods, that could be 2 or 3 miles or more. If you have really concise little ag land, it could be 2 miles too, because they're going through ag. But on average, it's about 1.5 miles. You could say 2 miles. But what they're doing is they want to go into a spot and find a location where they can call home and they don't have the harassment of female social pressure. Think about it. They disperse late summer into the fall. Mother kicks them out of the herd. Sometimes they disperse as a fawn, especially in areas where they don't need that mother to actually increase her survivability during the wintertime, like some of the big northern regions where they need to go to the deer yards. You find they disperse more as a 1.5-year-old as opposed to a fawn, more as a yearling instead of a fawn. So the reason that they're dispersing though is because the mother kicks them out of the herd. Again, the last place they want to stop is a place dominated by female social pressure. What does that mean? If you have large single food plots, and that's it, you have one big food plot, you have one good bedding area, those areas get taken over by does and fawns, doe family groups. This is an example. We have a small plot right here. This will actually be a clover plot. We actually have a blind right up here. You can see our redneck, right? Well, say you can barely see it. It's behind the red cedar. We hide it. You can shoot out at that angle and out at this angle right here. So it's very, very hidden. We watch the movement right here. We have a reveal camera right here. It's been on the tree for a while. So we get to see a lot of movement through here. It's a cool location. But what we really like seeing on a small food source like this, we have other food sources around here. We have quite a few on the property. What I like about these small food sources, this goes all the way back in my UP of Michigan days, is that I had 14 food plots totaling 8.5 acres. And I'd see this little brat pack of bucks, a couple 1.5-year-old spikes, maybe a little 3 or 4 point, and they're all hanging around each other and they're on a tiny little plot. And they see them every day in November, December when they're dispersing. And what's cool about that is they typically come back. They were actually dispersing because of female social pressure, and they found a little spot that they could call their own. It's pretty interesting how that works. Think about summer food plots. If you have giant doe herd family groups on your property, it's not very attractive to dispersing yearling bucks. Yeah, you might attract a mature buck during the rut only. But even then, if it's dominated by female social pressure on your property, you don't have those little food sources. You don't have those separate little bedding areas. You don't have that lay of the land where a 1.5-year-old buck or a fawn buck can call his own. Guess what? They move on. They just got blocked and pushed away by female social pressure. So again, the last thing they want to do is stick around on that property dominated by does and fawns and call that place home. I always look at it like you have that old swamp buck. He lives back in the swamps. People say, well, it's a good place for him. You know, a lot of times there's not much food back there. I'm thinking of cedar swamp up north. I'm thinking of conifer swamp, hemlocks in Pennsylvania, whatever it might be, where there's really not much food in there, but that buck goes in that location because he can call that spot his own. And I talk about in my Mature Buck Success by Design book, I referred to that old buck. I actually refer to it as my dad, you know, as that father figure, that my dad was this great person. But when he got older, he liked his time alone. And I feel like a mature buck is like that, where they lose their friends over time. They lose their buddies they hang out with. They're the oldest buck in the neighborhood. And they like to be left alone, just like my dad did when he was in his 70s. He liked to get away. Think of that big old buck in your area. It might be a 3 or 4-year-old. They still like their space. Your oldest buck might be a 2-year-old in the area. They still like their space. So think about that when you're planting your property this year. Think about these little hidden food plots. I love little hidden food plots like this. We're actually creating a spot right over here that's that's another small food plot. We're going to turn that into a 3/4 acre food plot. Then you go further away from that, we have about a 2 acre food plot. So you can see the progression here. You want bucks to be able to find a little spot like this, and whether they move to the big food plots, you know, eventually they do. Eventually those deer tolerate them. They move there after dark. You know, how many times have you guys seen a mature buck or a big buck picture and you see that buck and there's no other deer around it? So they have that space, they call it their own, and that's what we want to repeat on our property, a space that, whether it's a dispersing yearling buck, a fawn buck, or even an old monster, can come into the property and feel like, you know what, I have this space to myself, I'm away from the does and fawns. Yeah, during the rut they chase does for 7 days, 10 days here, another 7 days in the second rut, maybe even a third rut. For the majority of the year, that's why they come out in one portion of the field, does and fawns come out into the other, even in a big ag field, because they want that space alone. So that directly relates to, we have timber. I don't know if you can see the snow back in there, but we have timber back in here. We've cut aspen regeneration. We cut that, was that 2 years ago, Dylan? That wasn't even last winter, that was the winter before.
2.
Yeah, so 2 winters ago we cut that. We've had aspen, grouse populations increase around here. You can hear them in the spring. But we did that because we have a bedding area here. We've had lots of cuttings where we spend about a tank of gas, maybe an acre cutting, 3/4 of an acre cutting. We're really spacing those around the property. Because when you get in the woods, we want not just food sources, but we want those bucks to feel like they can have a really good spot to bed into. Maybe a couple during the summertime, but we want those bucks to stick around for fall and feel like they have their own little slice of heaven. And if we don't do that, then again, we have a big dominated doe family group property, and those bucks will move on. That's why I talk about a doe factor. That doe factor is real. It really is an important concept. If you don't understand that, you can never reach your potential on your property, because if you have too many does and fawns on your property because you have great food during the summertime, they stick around in the fall. That means that they'll eat your food out of house and home when it's planted in August. Does that are here today are here to stay. That means if they're on your property going into the hunting season in high numbers because they love fawning in the area, fawning grounds are very competitive. They want thick cover, they want summer food. I want those deer, those does and fawns off my property during the summertime. I want them to slowly trickle back. That means some are gonna stay on adjoining properties. They're getting exposed to more hunting pressure, and you have a more moderate population. What's good about that is you don't have those does and fawns ruling the roost and overpopulating the land and basically pushing mature bucks off the land. What does that mean? That means on a property like this, we've seen over 40 different bucks, antlered bucks throughout the season. No, 40 aren't living here. Probably a third are here in and around all the time. A third are here for a week here, a week there. Not a third, we might have 1 or 2, 5 times that come throughout the entire season. The bottom line is we probably had 25 does and fawns stretched corner to corner on 245 acres. It stretches out over a mile on the property on any one evening during October and November. So you should always have more total antlered bucks than you do total does and fawns in your property during the hunting season, at least a cumulative over an entire season of bucks. If you don't have that, it's probably because you have a female dominated property. We see it all the time. I go to client properties where they'll say we have 30, 35 does and fawns. I ask people, what do you estimate? 20 does and fawns, 40, 50 does and fawns, 15. If it's a poorly managed property where there's a lot of summer food, you'll see half as many bucks that they see throughout the entire season, half as many antlered bucks. You'll see even a similar number, but I want to see more. I want to see 50% more. I want to see double. We see that in Wisconsin on 50 acres. We've had one scrape that's had over 30 different bucks hit it throughout the season, different antlered bucks. We have 12, 15 does and fawns hitting those food plots every night, and that's about it. Think about those ratios. Think about the reasons that a mature buck, a doe, or a fawn, or a yearling buck actually settles onto a property and why it doesn't. And when you relate that back to everything you do on your land, guess what? You'll have more bucks on your land too. It's a pretty easy formula. Think about it. You can add hunting pressure in. You know, does and fawns are a lot more tolerant of hunting pressure than the old buck is. But bottom line is you need to have separation of food, separation of cover. Make sure you limit those summer food sources, and you too could have a lot more bucks on your land. You really should. If you're doing a good job, Think about it. You should have twice as many antlered bucks you see throughout the entire season than you do does and fawns on a typical October, November evening. And if you do not, you have some changes to make, and a lot of times it relates directly back to the number of does and fawns you have on your land. And it goes back even further to that, to why that buck left home in the first place when he was a fawn or a yearling buck. Hey, I'm really excited to introduce to you our Hills and Thermals web class. It's something we worked on all year. We're trying to put lots of facets of scouting, aerial imagery, diagrams on the whiteboard to really teach you how the wind moves through hills and how you should find bedding areas, how it relates to deer movements in general, how that relates to, this is a bedding area stand, this is a food source afternoon stand. We really tried to put this together and offer you a complete picture of how to navigate hills and find better success consistently where you hunt.